Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Shall we continue our adventures with DrBoneHead? Now, the next note that I have on my paper here is 9 minutes and 25 seconds, where I really wanted to stop. And this is just after he was saying the nonsense he was saying about how Ayn Rand's the brass tacks, right? Let's get down to brass tacks about Ayn Rand. What's the brass tacks about Ayn Rand? She started a cult. Yeah, nobody's ever started a cult before. That's what she was known for. So, and you know, I take exception to it being called a cult, but let's say we give him that. Let's say that we say that she started a cult and there was a group of people around her and some of them fooled around together. Is that what she should be known for? So he's just past that. So I'm going to let him say a little bit what he has to say here, and we're going to go from here.
That might be a good critique here. The historical conditions. You have Ayn Rand, whose family is chased out of Soviet Russia.
The historical conditions. Now, before he goes on, I'll just set this up a little bit. So, your historical conditions determine what you think, right? So, because you experienced X, therefore you believe Y, right? Like if you experienced the Holocaust, therefore you're against Nazis, or you're against whatever Nazism or violence, you're against war. You experienced war, so you're against war. Or you experienced spanking when you're little, so you're against it. Or you experienced something, therefore you have a reason to be against it, because you experienced it. And so, or where you came from determines something about you, right? So people weave this story about people. Now, I just want to posit, he says their family was chased out of Russia. Yeah, a lot of families were chased out of Russia. In fact, if you see my video about the Gulag after the end of World War II, you know that some of those families went back. Some of them were arrested 20 years later and given back to Stalin for him to put into his meat grinder to monetize. So, like the good communists that they were, they monetized people. So, yeah, let's see, well, geez, I'm off to Soviet Russia now. I'm going to have to do videos on that someday. I know so much about it I haven't talked about, and it's been popular lately with Jordan Peterson stuff. Well, I've lost my train of thought on that. Let's pick up with what he's saying.
Basically gets a massive hard-on for anything that's not collectivist. So she comes up with...
Right, so a whole bunch of people were driven out of Soviet Russia into the diaspora of countries all around the world, right? And some of them were handed back, I just mentioned that. But how many of them were from the middle class, like Ayn Rand's family? Right? Some, right? More than just Ayn Rand, right? How many of them were girls? More than just Ayn Rand, right? So how is that a backdrop that caused her to write the revolutionary philosophy that's going to change the history of the world? And if that is the backdrop that caused her to do that, then why didn't all of the other girls of the middle class who were driven out of Russia also become haters, full haters of any type of collectivism? Now, we can think this through a lot. We could talk a lot about this, but I will just suffice it to say right now that at some point you have to say the person chose to think. Not everybody chooses to think. It's actually rather difficult. But this person chose to think. And you say, well, and then their head blows up. They explode. This guy's head would explode. And he would say, why are we talking about Ayn Rand today? Why aren't we talking about any of the other middle-class Jews who were driven from Russia? And his head explodes. And I say, because Ayn Rand chose to think. The other ones didn't. Maybe one of them didn't. She wrote down a brilliant philosophy and she lost it. It fell in the toilet one day and she didn't rewrite it, you know? Who knows? Maybe that happened. But we know one thing. We know that Ayn Rand chose to write her philosophy down and actually produce it. And we have it. We know that much.
Mirror image philosophy that is sort of against what she perceives to be the great evil that attacked her as a child.
Okay, is
and her family.
Is objectivism a mirror image philosophy of the philosophy that attacked her? That is just crazy. I mean, a mere... Okay, so let's not go too deep into epistemology right here, but let's just say the following thing. And I've talked about this in other videos, so if you're familiar with my recent content, you'll know this metaphor. There's one correct way to walk on a tightrope. All the other directions are not going to work for walking on that tightrope. And even when you're on the tightrope, there aren't very many correct ways to do it. You should probably try not to roll in somersaults. Maybe if you're talented, you can do that. But you should probably be a little more careful than that, or you're very, very likely to fall. So if you're walking a tightrope, let's call it the tightrope of science or a free market or something like that. If you're walking a tightrope and you head off in any weird, bizarre direction for just any random reason that isn't very specifically and carefully chosen according to the facts of reality and where that wire is, then you are going to fall off. So,
United States, fearing the Soviets, picks this up not for its literary acumen, which, as any writer will tell you, is unadulterated pure garbage.
So this unadulterated pure garbage is the way to walk exactly on that tight wire. Now, it's not instructions on how to do it. It's instructions on how to figure out while you do it. It's not just a little booklet that says, now go straight 2 feet, now go left 2 feet, now go right 2 feet. It's an instruction booklet that says, you're going to have to look at the wire every single second. You're going to have to concentrate on the wire. You're going to have to make note of how far away it is. You're going to have to make note of it, whether it's slippery or wet. And so you're reading this book of instructions on how to behave in the world. It's not a book of instructions on how to actually do the wire. You've got to figure that out every second as you go. I hope my metaphor is not lost on you. That is what science is, right? Science is checking with reality every second. That's checking to make sure you're still on the tight wire. When you stop checking, you might coast for a ways, right? But who knows how far, and it depends on how crazy you get. What if you're like this guy and you say, instead of checking with reality and just going with the path that I can find with my senses, I'll just do any old random thing I want, and you start doing a side flip, you will go off, and you will not be on the path of objectivity anymore, or science. There are many, many answers how to do it wrong. But how to do it right is a method, the method of science.
They pick it up because it's a useful fucking tool, and they balance it out. So she has this huge cult following. She treats it like a cult following.
So she invented this philosophy, which is brilliant and amazing. She deduced it, she induced it, and she invented it. All three in different parts of it, right? And that is not down to the fact that she was a middle-class Jew who was driven from Russia. Those can have maybe some small effect. She knew about Russian history, right? But it did not seem to me, as I read through her works, that it was a pedantic replay of the history of Russia. It did not seem that way to me. So she is obviously not like haunted. I mean, she wrote We the Living, right? But Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead are not. She's not multi-year obsessed long-term with Soviet Russia. With collectivism, yeah. Now, let's give him credit, and let's give the whole theory credit now. That when you experience something, it can make you dedicated to or for or against that thing. She experienced Soviet Russia and was now dedicated against communism, let's say. But as objectivists, we appreciate it's much more in communism that she's against, right? It's altruism. But let's just give them credit that she's against communism, and he laughs at that. And he says she was against this just because she was driven out of that country by them. And it's ridiculous for her to set up her whole life fighting something just because her silly little family was chased out of the country. That's his implication there. I would respond that she was driven out of Soviet Russia by one of the most deadly, bloodthirsty dictatorships ever to grace this globe, ever to run amok with its filthy, dirty, bloody paws across the surface of this globe. So, maybe she might be slightly justified in having a fairly negative attitude towards Russia and collectivism after that. You would think so, right? He just dismisses that off out of hand. So she couldn't just choose to think for it for herself. She was guided into her philosophy by the fact that she was from Russia and was driven out of Russia. She couldn't just think of it for herself. And we can dismiss her because she didn't think of it for herself. She was only led to this philosophy because she was driven out of Russia by these people. This is a deep thinker we have here, ladies and gentlemen.
Her followers, everything like that. And then, thank Christ, she finally fucking dies. And unfortunately, like all good cult leaders, she leaves a legacy behind for her followers to beat their dicks to mercilessly. And we are left with, interestingly enough, full-blown furries that somehow worship this ideology. I mean, it's just really, really fascinating and shows the complete utter... Because again, like you said, the majority of these arguments have been completely refuted before. You know? Wow,
well, he wouldn't be able to go over any of that right now, would he? What are we doing here if we're not refuting Rand? Well, it seems to me if we compiled everything he said so far, it would be a list of puerile insults that don't even hit the mark. Ad hominems.
Throw Nietzsche at these motherfuckers as soon as they start talking about morality, you know, and laugh. But again, like,
that would be a sophisticated thing for him to do, wouldn't it? Just throw Nietzsche at you, right? Why don't you go watch Mr. Cropper's videos on Nietzsche? It just so happens that it's hours long. Hours long. I don't remember how many hours, but it's hours long. Better than any university course that you get with that book in it, unless you take a university course on that book, and even then the university professor will probably screw with your head. So just go watch my videos on Zarathustra and see what an objectivist has to say about Nietzsche's ethics. Come to think of it, what about Nietzsche's ethics? What does he have to say about Nietzsche's ethics? How do Nietzsche's ethics apply to objectivism or to Rand?
The Peterson thing, when we're talking about a specific religious connotation, these people aren't looking for consistent points of view. They have a feeling. They want to know that that feeling is correct, and whatever bullshit story you feed them in the process, they're totally fine with it.
Yeah, well,
that's Peterson's appeal. That people have a feeling, he's pushing that feeling button, and that makes him happy. So he just dismisses Peterson's appeal to all the people who believe that Western society has no values and is a vacuous, nihilistic mess. He just dismisses all that, says, no, Peterson's just pushing a good feeling button in him. It's just as easily dismissible as that. So, what's scary is that this guy might be convincing to some people. What's even scarier is that somebody was convincing to this guy, and that's why he believes this nonsense. That's what's even scarier, is that somebody tricked him into believing this garbage.
They're sort of engineering a philosophy backwards, which is
exactly
the rich and powerful are good.
What does he know about objectivism? So they start with the rich and powerful are good, and they work down from there. What do we say about anarchists, right? That they start with politics, so they don't know what they're doing. Where do we start? We start with epistemology and metaphysics at the very base. Is it true that Ayn Rand built her philosophy backwards? No, Ayn Rand, people asked her, are you a capitalist? She said, I'm an advocate for egoism. And they said, yeah, but you support capitalism. She said, well, I'm an advocate for egoism. And because that's the basis on which you would be a capitalist. You would not want to be because a lot of people say I'm a capitalist because there are more factories and better homes for the people. She didn't say that. She said, I'm a capitalist because I'm an egoist. Capitalism is a derivative. Now, the whole philosophy of objectivism built that way. It's deduced from the axioms obsessively, systematically, scientifically. For him to say that it's built backwards and deduced from the idea that rich people are good, and now what do we say? Well, let's give him credit in one way. Such a big philosophy, and so many people arguing so well for it, they admit that it's hard to defeat. All of that could be so coherently put together just to defend rich people? Wow! That's quite a feat. To put all that philosophy together just to defend rich people. So it's not a valid philosophy then, is it? So it is a pack of lies to defend rich people. Quite impressive that it's that massive, that coherent, and that hard for them to argue against. Quite impressive.
Any sort of populist racism or misogyny is kind of justified, and
any sort of populist racism is justified. Well, she did have an essay on racism where she said that racism is one of the stupidest, lowest forms of collectivism because you don't even have to have a concept in your mind for it. She said she can give the collectivists and the communists at least as much credit as the fact that they can hold a concept in their mind. And their concept would be he's rich or he's poor. Right? But the racists don't even rise to the level of having a concept. They look only at a surface perception. And that is how they judge. So that's what Ayn Rand said about racism, that it was collectivism of the lowest and most despicable and most superfluous kind. What does he know about racism? It justifies any kind of racism. What kind of a moron is this guy?
Work backwards from it. Would you like to do some black magic with me? Or maybe not?
I'll
this is just utter nonsense.
This far away.
They just talk about
afterwards.
stupid garbage for a while.
Fuck yeah!
Oh, you
Boom!
idiots. You're terrible people.
Huh.
Alright.
Especially what I find so interesting.
Alright. So here we are. We're going to listen to him for the next 45 seconds or so. I'll probably have to stop somewhere in there to rant about something, but we're going to see what we go. Please suggest to me, ladies and gentlemen, more. This was given to me by you guys. Disenthrall was given to me by you guys. Roy Childs was given to me by you guys. The donations were given to me by you guys. Please donate to me. I need some subscribers on Subscribestar, but I'm also afraid that they might not actually approve it. So if you're watching this as soon as this video is put up or within the next few days, go give me $5 on there because I have to have 5 subscribers to get money off of there at all. Like, I can't get any money off of there until I have 5 subscribers. So it would be good if I could at least get that to get the gears of it worked out and make sure it's going to work. But also, if you go on there and it's funny and it says that this is count as an open or something, then don't do it because I don't know if I will be approved. But I might need to get subscribers to be approved, so see what you want to do about that. Or if you want to skip all that, just go to Patreon and give me a few bucks if you appreciate what I do. This is fun. I'm having fun. But I don't know exactly what I should be doing, so we're just getting rolling here, aren't I? I've just gotten into this last couple of weeks. We're just getting going, but this is fun. All right. That's a commercial. I put these commercials in because if I do it at the end, you'll skip it. And if I do it at the beginning, you'll skip it. I know how you bastards are.
It's that her whole thing about self-interest, it's not real self-interest. It's not real self-interest at all. Because, again, the sheer fact that she ties self-interest solely this sort of economic platform denies that all these business people and whatever, so much of their life is basically neglected, which is not.
She ties self-interest solely to the economic platform. Well, we just went over that, didn't we? She refused to mention economics in the same sentence as what she insisted on. She refused to mention economics without mentioning self-interest. Self-interest is the base of economics. So he says that economics is the base of self-interest. And that's the problem with Rand, is that her economics is the base of her self-interest. She takes economics and then she deduces her ethics from her economics. That's the problem with Rand. Now, why would he view it that way? Because he's a Marxist and he views economics as primary. Not only as primary, but as metaphysically primary. Like metaphysics is equal to economics for Marxists. So, in his mind, where would she get her ethics? She would have to deduce it from her economics, or politics, or idea of capitalism. So she started with capitalism and deduced selfishness from capitalism. Well, who is most benefited, according to this guy's shallow view of it, who is most benefited in capitalism? The rich people. Therefore, her ethics deduced from capitalism is an ethics for rich people. You see how they got there? I mean, they get there because they start with economics as their base. Marxism takes economics as a metaphysical given. So,
Self-interest. If you're living for a business all the fucking time, if you're living to make money all the fucking time, you're not really living for yourself. You're
living for business all the time. You're living for money all the time. Is that what we learn when we read Ayn Rand? Now, let's say that we could read her ideas and come away with that misinterpretation. Well, then she would do well to portray it in art for us so that we didn't misunderstand, wouldn't she? Just so happens she did portray it in art. And it just so happens that the people in her books make a point of walking away. So one of them is based completely on that, right? That's the whole theme. And the other one has Howard Rourke, who shuts down his office and goes and works in a quarry in Connecticut. So why would he do that? If he's selfish, if he's selfish, he would be like Peter Keating, wouldn't he? He would do whatever the people wanted him to do, build the buildings that people wanted him to design. Then he would be selfish in this guy's view. But this guy hasn't read The Fountainhead, and he's not going to. He probably can't read.
You're living for a phantasm of yourself, a small slice of your greater whole. And you're allowing the rest of you, the part that wants to have a family, the part that wants to learn how to paint, the part that wants to go camping, you're letting that rot away and die.
That's funny. You're letting the part that wants to paint rot away and die. That's funny because there's a bit in The Fountainhead where Peter Keating, it's later in the book, Peter Keating comes to Rourke and he brings some paintings. It's a heartbreaking scene. Now, Peter Keating also, if I remember right, he rented a little cottage somewhere and he kept a canvas and some paints there and he just went there by himself and painted. And he knew it was garbage and he knew it wasn't going to be any good and stuff. And at one point he took them to Howard Rourke and he asked Howard Rourke, he said, is it too late? And Howard Rourke said, yeah, it is. Now, I think that was a little heartless of Ayn Rand to put it in there like that. But she actually put a description of the situation this guy's describing. Somebody's soul melted away because they were pursuing something. She actually described that and explored it throughout the book. She didn't just describe it in a sentence. She explored throughout The Fountainhead that type of a situation where somebody pursued their supposed self-interest, where Peter Keating did the selfish thing and tried to be famous and tried to have everybody admire him. And at the end, his soul was empty. He was just a reflection of a bunch of other people. And so that's funny that he would mention that Ayn Rand would put it in her works, that he wouldn't be aware of it, and then we could then suppose that he is an instance of Peter Keating or worse. So I would add that insult at this point. This gentleman doesn't rise to the level of a Peter Keating.
You're cutting off your greater self for money.
Cutting off your greater self for money. Is that what Rourke did when he went to the quarry? Is that what they did when they stepped away from transcontinental railroads and went to live in a little village in the mountains? You're cutting off your greater self for money.
Theory and practice in Ayn Rand's Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. This essay, for some reason, is called The Man-Haters, although I don't see anything about them. It just, I don't know. She tends to do shit like that. I think it's like a pun, maybe, because, I don't know, everyone who doesn't agree with her, like, hates humans or something. Which is ironic, because she thinks morality is somehow outside of humans.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting thing.
Morality is somehow outside of humans, he says. He says morality is outside of humans. Okay, so let's just take a moral thing, because morals, I know we need morals on a desert island, but let's do morals plus other people, just for clarity's sake. Is it true that morals are outside of people? If I go to my neighbor and hit him on the head and take his steak, in what sense is the moral or immoralness of that outside of me? Well, I would say that the moral or immoralness would be a way that we would categorize or think of the action. That's how I would describe it. I would say that our actions would be described after or before the fact, or in the theoretical, hypothetical thinking about it. Our actions would be described as either moral or immoral. In what way would morality exist outside of the person who's going and hitting their neighbor on the head and stealing their steak? What does he mean by that? Of course, the only thing he could mean is some very strange floating platonic garbage, like he mentioned earlier. He said, what is it, floating in space and we have to get on a spaceship and go out and get it? That's how confused they are. So it's kind of sad. It makes me think how many people out there in the world are beyond being reached. How many people can we just not reach, right? Could we just possibly not even maybe ever possibly get to him, even if we tied him to a chair and spoke to him for 72 hours straight? Is it possible we just could not get to these guys?
Believing that collectivists are motivated by authentic concern for the welfare of mankind, capitalism's alleged defenders assure its enemies that capitalism is the practical road to the socialist's goal, the best means to the same end, the best servant of public needs. Then they wonder why they fail, why the bloody muck of socialization keeps oozing forward over the face of the globe. So, what's interesting is her total denial of any need to group together, or that she's part of any sort of group. And
see, what? So he read a pretty brilliant quote from her, and then he said, he just like changed the subject. He said, what's interesting about her, terrible about her, is that she won't group herself up. She's not part of any group, and she refuses to be part of any group. She's such an individualist. That damn individualist, her.
If you see pictures of her, I think the most telling thing is she has a picture in her house, and she has a patio with just one chair.
She lived in New York City, and the patios, I'm certain, couldn't fit 2 chairs. In fact, she probably had the one chair out there to go sit and smoke on. And she probably wouldn't have had that chair out there if she wasn't a smoker. She would have had, some plants or something, or it would have been a storage space. There's just no room in New York City, so I don't blame her for having only one chair. Now, if it was a great, huge patio with one chair on it, that would be strange. But she had a small apartment in New York City, so it was probably her relaxation or smoking zone or something like that.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Her egoism is it's lonely. It's like it isolates you, and there's no.
It's lonely and it isolates you. But do you remember that line from the Fountainhead that to say I love you, first you have to say I? Do you remember that? Well, self-esteem and your self-esteem and your view of yourself, your idea of yourself, is built up hierarchically in the same way that philosophy is. And just like you can't take a concept out of politics and just run with it and apply it anywhere you want, just because a concept in politics is derived, just as the same way that it is derived within a context, so is your self-esteem, and so is your personality derived within the context of your actions and your thoughts and your desires. And we're half an hour into it now. I've lost my train of thought on that. Well, I'm going to have to rewind and see what I said there. Patronize me if you like this. We're at 14 minutes out of an hour on this. I don't know how much more energy I have for this guy. So let me. Oh, I'll mention I do these things late at night because, and I couldn't figure out why. But here's why. Not always. Sometimes you see the sun shining on me. But I was waiting, pacing around. I said, why am I pacing around? Why don't I sit down and do this video? Then I realized, oh, my daughter goes to bed in 20 minutes. So after like 9 o'clock hour, and then my wife goes to bed a bit after that at 11 or something, that's when I can peacefully have nobody running in or out or screaming or asking me where the can opener is. So that's when I do my videos. So it's usually late, or it's in the middle of the day if I happen to have a bit of peace and quiet. Well, thank you for patronizing me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. This is turning out to be an epic defense of Ayn Rand, isn't it? This is like an epic attack on Ayn Rand. Well, that's a silly thing to say. It's a puerile attack on Ayn Rand. But it's giving me the chance to say things some of you might have only heard, and might have forgotten, or you haven't heard yet. And so I get to go over these little facts about Ayn Rand and refute these stupid things they say. No, I think this is a very good exercise. I think this is going well. If I could title it something else besides Rand versus Stirner at Bonehead, which I'm titling it because that's what the video it's on. If I could title it something else, this would be titled Defending Ayn Rand Against Knuckleheads, or something like that. But I probably shouldn't retitle the series now. Alright, thank you. See you next video.